Breaking tonight, still no motive in connection to the break-ins, high-speed pursuit and deadly shootout with police on Saturday.
6 News has also been digging into the past of the suspect. We found a disturbing incident against an ex-girlfriend from a year ago. But first, here's the latest. Omaha police say 41-year-old Matthew Briggs forced his way into 3 different homes, 2 in southwest Omaha and 1 in Regency, just south of West Roads Mall. Investigators say he drove his sedan into the garage door of one of the homes twice and even shot a gun at a neighbor who was checking on the disturbance. Around 7 a.m. yesterday, officers found 52-year-old Stephen Donsback in his Regency home. He'd been shot to death.
Omaha police have not shared any information about whether the victims were targeted or picked at random. We did come across this protection order handwritten from a year ago. An ex-girlfriend told the courts that Matthew Briggs kicked in a side door at her home and tried running her over with a rented pickup. This account from June of last year. On a different day, the woman said he attacked her family, used a ladder to remove a home security camera, and threw her bed into the front yard. For this, Matthew Briggs pleaded guilty to disturbing the peace. His sentence, 2 days in jail. 6 News' Marlo Lundak tonight with a big picture view on the data behind domestic violence.
3 homes in Omaha targeted Saturday. Police say 1 woman physically assaulted during a break-in. 1 man found dead at a different home. A day-long search of the suspect ended in Council Bluffs, where officers shot and killed him. If the first woman doesn't escape and call 911, who knows what else could have happened?
Information from those 2 incidents led us to do a check the well-being call here at this location.
It's at this home in Regency where Stephen Donsback was found shot to death. Neighbors tell 6 News he lived there for a number of years. It's not yet clear the relationship between the suspect Matthew Briggs and any of the victims. But local experts say domestic violence is happening in our communities more than people might expect.
It's something that's secret and not often reported, but we know that 1 in 4 women experience domestic violence and 1 in 9 men will experience domestic violence. So it's quite prevalent.
Katie Welsh is with the Women's Center for Advancement, a nonprofit centered around supporting those in crisis situations. She says it's not uncommon to see domestic violence situations escalate, especially when a weapon is involved.
We know that when a firearm is present in a domestic violence situation, that the risk of homicide goes up by 500%.
She says statistics also show that those homicide victims aren't always the intimate partner. 20% of the time, it's someone else.
Really, it's not just the victims of domestic violence who should be afraid of domestic violence. It's all of us, as neighbors, as bystanders, as people who want to intervene and help somebody. The risk to everybody by perpetrators of domestic violence is very great, especially when a firearm is present.
And as of Sunday evening, police are still working to piece together the relationships of everyone involved on Saturday. And Welsh says anyone struggling with a domestic violence situation can reach out to the WCA for help at any time. On your site in Omaha, Marlo Lundak, 6 News.
2 officers, one with Omaha Police and one with Council Bluffs, are under paid administrative leave as the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation handles that part of the case. That's standard procedure in officer-involved shootings. Police say they also found 2 firearms in the vehicle Briggs carjacked in Sarpy County. Now, anyone in need of support during a domestic situation, you can call the WCA's crisis hotline, that number listed on the screen.